light of the NSA level meeting in Zurich, and this and more in the next 1 hour. First, our headlines. My name is Mark Lynn. The US and India are in agreement on Afghanistan, says the US Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman. The World Food Program Director says that Afghanistan's economy is on the brink of collapse and a humanitarian crisis has escalated and magnified at an incredible pace over the past few weeks. A US judge blocks the enforcement of a near-total abortion ban in Texas. The law bans abortion after 6 weeks of a woman's pregnancy. No exceptions, even for rape. The law rewards at least $10,000 to anyone who sues any person who aided an abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. Peru's President Castillo swears in the new Prime Minister. The left-wing former head of Congress, Mirta Vázquez, takes over after the resignation of Guido Bellido. India's female wrestler Anshu Malik creates history in the World Wrestling Championship, becoming the first Indian woman wrestler to reach the finals of the World Wrestling Championship. And Navratri, the festival, is being celebrated amid COVID-19 pandemic restrictions across the country. The Prime Minister extends his greetings on the occasion. Prasar Bharati's network brings special shows, live coverage and much more to pep up the festive mood. As always, let's begin with the big news. Well, the financial situation in Afghanistan is getting from bad to worse. People are still looking for ways to escape the problems there and the country is facing by hoping to flee. But Afghanistan was already among the world's worst humanitarian situations before the Taliban assumed power in August. India and the United States are in agreement in Afghanistan, says the US Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman. Here's a report.
There seems to be no end to crisis in Afghanistan, but United States and India are in agreement on Afghanistan, and these are the remarks that were made by none other than Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman.
We remain engaged with each other on Afghanistan and counterterrorism as well. Our two countries will meet soon for a counterterrorism joint working group and a homeland security dialogue to expand our cooperation in these areas.
Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla on Wednesday held talks with his US counterpart Wendy Sherman in New Delhi.
There are important geopolitical changes that have taken place, and of course our foreign policies need to be agile and responsive to the situations that we confront. Over the past few decades, but more in the past few years, I think our relationship has seen a very, very steady growth in both in substance, pace, and momentum. And the solid foundation in bilateral ties, the enhanced level of understanding and trust have led to more active and regular engagements in matters of strategic interest as well as in global issues.
The situation in Afghanistan is turning from bad to worst. Poverty and hunger have worsened since the Taliban takeover. The country was already in a bad shape, suffering from drought and the COVID-19 pandemic. Thousands of Afghans are trying to flee their country every day from Zaranj, the smuggling capital in Afghanistan's Nimroz province, due to unemployment, poverty and uncertainty. The World Food Program's top official in Afghanistan on Wednesday urged for more international attention to help millions of vulnerable Afghans, as the country's economic, climate and humanitarian plight is pushing its residents to the very brink of survival.
The event of 15th of August resulted in a freezing of the foreign reserves and the suspension of development and on-budget assistance, and the consequences have just been devastating. The economy is on the brink of collapse here in Afghanistan. The 38 million Afghans who still live in the country are adjusting to a new reality. It is incredibly sad, and over the weeks a humanitarian crisis has just escalated and magnified at an incredible pace. It's a crisis that has its roots in decades of conflict and the increasing pressures of climate change.
Afghanistan was already among the world's worst humanitarian situations prior to the Taliban assuming power in August, which has deepened existing needs and vulnerabilities. 500,000 people have been displaced in Afghanistan in recent months. According to UN High Commissioner for Refugees Filippo Grandi, the situation remains grim in Afghanistan and residents are waiting for some respite. World Today Desk, DD India.
Well, our guest on the program today is Prabhu Dayal, former senior diplomat. Thank you very much, Ambassador Dayal, for joining us. So, what do you make of the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State saying that India and Afghanistan are on the same page in a sense in what's happening in Afghanistan? I think perhaps, you know, the U.S. has washed their hands off in Afghanistan. Certainly not what India is doing.
Well, you know, the U.S. is making the right noises. It is saying that it is concerned about the situation in Afghanistan. It is also talking about certain actions which it may take to control the Taliban. But the fact of the matter is that this situation is very much the creation of the United States itself.
Yes.
What the US is now trying to do is a bit like locking the stable door when the steed is stolen. The US was a little premature in announcing its withdrawal dates for the armed forces stationed in Afghanistan, because this date when the US forces would withdraw should have been announced after the intra-Afghan talks had reached some kind of a conclusion. But by announcing the withdrawal date first, it really encouraged indirectly the Taliban to drag its feet in the intra-Afghan talks. And what we witnessed was that ultimately there was no outcome of the talks. The US withdrew, and within a very, very short time,
Yes.
the Taliban invaded the country and occupied it. So it was something that the Pakistanis abetted.
Yes.
The United States looked the other way. So in my view, the situation in Afghanistan is messy because of the manner in which the Americans withdrew their forces from there.
Yes, but India has built up a reputation of being a country which is a first responder in terms of, you know, humanitarian kinds of situations and crises. Look at the case with COVID, you know, or even with earthquakes and other things like this. This too is a humanitarian kind of crisis that is emerging in Afghanistan. Not, you know, even if one helps people out, one is not legitimizing the government in Afghanistan. And we can see, yes, we can also see that just a few, about half an hour ago, the External Affairs Ministry did clarify that, you know, India has extended the visas of Afghan nationals in India. So India is definitely doing its bit.
Certainly. You know, India is a true friend of Afghanistan, and it has gone out of its way to help Afghanistan in its path towards development. Now, the problem at the moment, or rather the dilemma, shall I say,
Yes.
is that if you extend a helping hand to the people in Afghanistan, you have to weigh at the same time the fact whether you're also not strengthening the Taliban's grip on the country. So it's really a choice between the devil and the deep sea. If you don't give assistance, then the people of Afghanistan suffer. But if you do give Afghan assistance, some of it is bound to be siphoned away. In any case, the Taliban will end up being strengthened. So
Yes.
if assistance has to be given, it has to be very carefully calibrated. And at the same time, the Taliban must be held to account for how they handle the disbursement of such assistance. In any case, they should also be held to account in the context of the larger political situation in that country.
And India and the US need to get on the same page as far as Pakistan's involvement in Afghanistan is concerned. India certainly, you know, wants to see that the land and the territory of Afghanistan should not be used for any terror activities against any country, let alone, you know, by Pakistani interests to try and, nurture or develop what should we say, breeding grounds for terrorism there. Surely the United States can, enforce Pakistan to do something which it used to do in the past?
Well, the United States treated Pakistan as if it was going to be a part of the solution. And in fact, Pakistan has always been a part of the problem in Afghanistan. Now, the US let Pakistan have its way, directly or indirectly, because the Taliban are Pakistan's creation. Now, how does the United States sort out the situation? Certainly, it will have to act really tough with Pakistan. There is a lot of talk within the United States administration of putting the checks on Pakistan and calling to account the armed forces in the ISI in that country. But, the ground situation has to tally with words. In other words, actions have to match strong words. And I do hope that some strong actions are taken against the Pakistan establishment, because otherwise it will continue to have its way in Afghanistan and it will endanger the geopolitical situation in our region. It is beyond doubt that Pakistan has been misusing Afghanistan's territory in the past when the Taliban was in control, that is Taliban 1.0, and Pakistan is certainly poised to do that during Taliban 2.0. So I do not trust the Pakistanis one bit.
Yes.
The United States has been very trustful of them, but it is time that the United States realizes that Pakistan needs to be checked and the establishment there needs to be brought to book. Otherwise, the situation in Afghanistan cannot be brought under control.
But to what extent is the United States invested in Pakistan to be able to, exert pressure on it at this stage? Because, there is a legacy of, the Pakistani using, the Pakistanis using a lot of U.S. equipment, U.S. funds in terms of its military operations. But the point is that currently, with the U.S. and China being where they are, and China and Pakistan being where they are, is it in the U.S. interest to be even invested in Pakistan?
Well, the U.S. has somehow treated Pakistan as if it were a country which was indispensable. It did so during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and it continued to do so when it thought that Pakistan would assist it in the context of controlling the post-Soviet situation there. However, the United States has plenty of levers to hold Pakistan in check. As you said, Pakistan and China are quite on the same page. But the fact is that the Pakistani armed forces have a huge amount of dependence on US supplies, because there is a lot of equipment which Pakistan uses which is of US origin.
Yeah.
And certainly it is in need of spares and servicing and so on and so forth. And these services cannot be provided instantaneously by China. Of course, China will help Pakistan because the two countries treat each other as if they were all-weather friends. But the US can control the levers of power. It can sanction Pakistan. It does need to sanction Pakistan very frankly, because unless the armed forces in Pakistan are held in check or made more accountable for their actions, there is going to be no way that you will be able to control the ISI's operations in Afghanistan.
Absolutely, and so that leads us very much to the ISI's operations in Afghanistan, which will continue. And we can see that with China's backing now, that's the big threat for the region. So it's important that India and the United States are on the same page, using that similar kind of language as far as trying to thwart any designs of this nature. How do you see, this kind of cooperation, and how will it actually be brought to fruition in the context of Afghanistan? Because India has invested in the developmental projects in Afghanistan, has been invested for a period of time and will continue because the people-to-people relationship between India and Afghanistan cannot be, cannot suddenly be held hostage to the situation.
Well, there are several aspects on which you have dwelt.
Yes.
First of all, the India-Afghanistan equation. As you pointed out, India is a friend of the Afghan people. It has invested heavily in their welfare, and it would like to continue helping the Afghan people if this political situation within that country permits India to play an active role there. Secondly, you touched upon the India-US equation. Certainly, India and the United States are very much on the same page. But if that is so, why does the talk of CAATSA sanctions as regards the S-400 purchases keep coming up?
Yes.
Even during the talks which our Foreign Secretary had with the US Deputy Secretary of State, this issue seems to have come up. Now, if India is a friend, there should be no hesitation and no delay whatsoever on the part of the United States from granting an exemption to India from CAATSA sanctions. Now, the US keeps saying that S-400 missile systems are dangerous and that it has sanctioned Turkey and China in the past. But the equation with India is totally different. And India needs the S-400 defense systems for its own security. And this fact has been explained very clearly to the United States. So I would like to see US actions matching their words.
Right.
It's not good enough to say that India and the United States are on the same page and they have shared security interests. The US should end all talk of CAATSA sanctions and grant a waiver without any delay, because this would ease certain concerns which exist within India in this regard.
Absolutely, and it should be independent. India's relationship with Russia, or with any country for that matter, should be independent of the bilateral relationship between India and the United States, even if it's playing out in the Afghanistan theater or even in the Indo-Pacific. Do you think that that can actually happen, or you think that, the US functions, its diplomacy functions in such a way that, it believes that it has to keep its interests, which means that those interests against Russia or China for that matter now would be forced upon those who are working with it in other theaters?
Well, the United States, like any other country, shapes its foreign policy keeping in mind its own interests.
Yes.
The US Deputy Secretary of State very clearly said that they would cooperate with China where it works for them, and they will compete with it where it doesn't. So in other words, their foreign policy is quite flexible in regard to any country. Now, why can't India's foreign policy also be considered to be flexible? The US may have certain concerns regarding Russian military equipment, but India has a history of military cooperation and securing military supplies from Russia, which even predates the demise of the Soviet Union. So in the context of this relationship, India can't suddenly shift totally away, but it has to weigh its needs and its requirements. And these requirements have been made very clear to the United States. So I think that just as the US is flexible in regard to the manner in which it handles its foreign policy vis-a-vis other countries, the US should also realize that countries with which it wants to be friends have their own security interests also.
Right.
And sanctioning India would be absolutely bizarre in this context.
Okay, the basic concern, of course, in Afghanistan, Ambassador, is that the economy is collapsing. So to shore up an economy, in any case, the Afghan economy was not, entirely an economy that was functioning. It was on its own. It was being propped up. and all those props are now also vanishing. So the point is that this country would be on the brink of collapse in terms of its financial resources, and that's going to play out in huge poverty and humanitarian concerns. Who is coming to the rescue of the Afghan people?
Well, at the moment, nobody really seems to be doing much.
Yeah.
The United Nations Secretary General has thrown a lot of light on the precarious situation in Afghanistan. Various countries have emphasized the need to give this country, assistance in such a dire situation. But the fact is that the Taliban must first behave responsibly. Everything really hinges on the manner in which the Taliban shapes its attitude towards issues like human rights, treatment of minorities, treatment of women, and there is increasing concern about the fact that the Taliban is not really living up to its words. It had promised a lot. It had said that it will respect human rights, that it will give women full rights, etc., and that it also would respect the rights of minorities. But the stark reality is something totally different. The Taliban's conduct has been not up to the mark, and therefore, for this reason, assistance to the people of Afghanistan is getting delayed. So if the Taliban behaves responsibly, we will find that the much needed assistance for the Afghan people will start pouring in quite rapidly. Everyone wants to help the people of Afghanistan. The problem is that the Taliban is an irritant in this entire situation.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, former senior diplomat, for joining us and throwing light on this important subject. Moving on to our next story then. Speaking at the DD News Conclave program, the External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar spoke of India's recognition and global influence as a first respondent to the world's key concerns seen in response to COVID and other humanitarian needs or disasters. Let's listen to what he said.
One, I think we all need to appreciate how much our capabilities have changed in these 75 years. That today we are, in nominal terms, the 5th or 6th largest economy, in PPP terms, the 3rd. That our political influence, our capability to contribute in many ways. I mean, we are seeing it today in terms of vaccines in response to COVID, but even in terms of humanitarian assistance or disaster response in Nepal, in Yemen, in Africa and Sri Lanka, we are seen very much as a first responder. In terms of connectivity, in terms of projects outside, in terms of the influence which we bring to bear on global debate. So I would say the one big change which I've seen, I mean, I've seen it in the course of my career, which is a little more than half of those 75 years.
Well, with regard to India's bilateral relations with Pakistan, the EAM made it clear that the onus is on Pakistan whether it wants to be a normal neighbor with India.
In terms of where our relationship with Pakistan goes, everybody wants to be friends with their neighbors, but you want to be friends on terms which a civilized world will accept. Terrorism is not one of those terms. Okay, so neighbors, neighbors are supposed to trade with you. Neighbors are supposed to give you connectivity. Neighbors are supposed to promote contacts, to increase travel. Now, all of that hasn't happened with this neighbor. So, I think they have an important choice whether to be a normal neighbor to us. A lot of it, the next 75 years, will depend on the choice that they make.
On China, the External Affairs Minister said that if peace and tranquility in border areas is disturbed, peace and tranquility is disturbed, then it impacts the development of ties.
Basis for developing our ties, especially after 1988, has been peace and tranquility in the border areas. If the peace and tranquility in the border areas is disturbed, which is currently the case, then it is natural that the development of our ties will be affected. Okay. I'm not advocating that we should solve our boundary dispute. That's a much more complicated issue. I think we must distinguish between the boundary dispute solution and maintaining peace and tranquility, which is a much easier and much more common sense thing to do. And it is in fact even the peace and tranquility whose disturbances cause the current situation. For me, it would be important that there is mutual respect between them, that we give each other space, we recognize each one of us has interests. So in a sense, I would say, I've spoken earlier about a multipolar world. I think it's very important we have a multipolar Asia. You're not going to have a multipolar world if you don't have a multipolar Asia.
And speaking of China, well, the U.S. President Joe Biden and the Chinese President Xi Jinping planned the U.S.-China virtual summit before the end of the year. There was a closed-door meeting between the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and the top Chinese diplomat Yang Jiechi in Zurich. And China and the U.S., they say that the talks were constructive and candid, and that those talks in fact lasted 6 hours, so something came out of them. Let's look at the details.
A bid to improve communication despite a deepening strategic rivalry and tensions. A meeting between US and China finally took place. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with his Chinese counterpart in Zurich on Wednesday. The two sides had a comprehensive and in-depth exchange of views on China-US relations as well as international and regional issues of common concern. It is Sullivan's first face-to-face meeting with Yang since their acrimonious exchanges in Alaska in March, which also involved US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The two sides agreed to take actions to implement the spirit of the phone call between Chinese and US heads of state on September the 10th, strengthen strategic communication, properly manage differences, avoid conflict and confrontation, seek mutual benefit and win-win results, and work together to bring China-US relations back to the right track of sound and steady development. The White House said in a statement that the meeting follows up on President Joe Biden's September 9th call with Chinese President Xi Jinping as we continue to seek to responsibly manage the competition between the United States and the People's Republic of China. The White House also said Sullivan raised concerns about contentious issues such as China's actions in the South China Sea, as well as on human rights and Beijing's stances on Hong Kong, Xinjiang and Taiwan. Both Beijing and Washington said the talks, which lasted 6 hours, were constructive and candid. The US side said that the tone was very different from Alaska. That call ended a nearly 7-month gap in direct communication between the leaders, and they discussed the need to ensure that competition between the two, with relations sinking to their lowest level in decades. But on Wednesday only, while addressing the US-India Business Council Summit in India, country's Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman said that US will compete vigorously with China when it needs to.
We'll compete vigorously with China where we should. We'll cooperate with China where it's in our interest to do so. I'm sure the same is true for India. And we will challenge China where we must, where it undermines our interests, the interests of our partners and allies, or threatens the rules-based international order. I think we in India are like-minded in that regard.
The years-long business and strategic partnership between the USA and China saw a shift over the past decade on a range of issues, including Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific region and other trade-related matters. All eyes are on the US-China ties now. Who will blink first remains to be seen. World Today Desk, DD India.
Moving on to news from the United States. Well, a federal judge in Austin, in Texas, the U.S. District Judge Robert Pittman, he has temporarily blocked a near total ban on abortion in Texas. The Republican-backed law, it bars women from obtaining an abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. Now, litigation over its legality continues, but Judge Pittman's action also can be appealed in the New Orleans-based U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is a conservative-leaning body that had previously allowed the Texas abortion ban to proceed. Here's more.
A federal judge on October 6th temporarily blocked a near-total ban on abortion in Texas, the toughest such law in the United States. The law bans abortion after 6 weeks of a woman's pregnancy, despite the fact that many women become aware of their pregnancy after that period of time. The law does not make any exceptions for rape either. The law rewards at least $10,000 to anyone who sues any person who aided an abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. Texas Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican, has defended the legality of the state's abortion law.
Our Creator endowed us with the right to life, and yet millions of children lose their right to life every year because of abortion. In Texas, we work to save those lives. And that's exactly what the Texas legislature did this session. They worked together on a bipartisan basis to pass a bill that I'm about to sign that ensures that the life of every unborn child who has a heartbeat will be saved from the ravages of abortion.
The Justice Department argued that the law impedes women from exercising their constitutional right to terminate a pregnancy that was recognized in the Supreme Court's 1973 Roe v. Wade decision that legalized abortion nationwide.
The Justice Department has filed a lawsuit against the state of Texas. Our position is set out in detail in our complaint. Its basis is as follows. SB 8 bans nearly all abortions in the state after 6 weeks of pregnancy, before many women even know they are pregnant, and months before a pregnancy is viable. It does so even in cases of rape, sexual abuse, or incest.
Earlier, women's rights advocates gathered at the Texas Capitol to protest against the country's most restrictive abortion law, launching a series of 660 marches around the United States in support of reproductive freedom.
I felt betrayed by my politician. How dare they? How dare they do that to their women? And to do this without a real vote? You know what I mean? We don't remember coming out for that, and they got it in sneaky, and the way they passed it was underhanded. Everything about it smells to high heaven.
The so-called heartbeat law, which went into effect on September 1st, bans abortion after cardiac activity is detected in the embryo, usually around 6 weeks. This is before most women know that they are pregnant, and earlier than 85% to 90% of all abortions are carried out. World Today Desk, DD India.
The Cumbre Vieja volcano continues to shoot up red-hot lava into the sky, threatening the atmosphere of the island. Scientists say that the volcano has so far expelled some 250,000 tons of highly toxic sulfur dioxide into the air since its first eruption on September 19. Let's look at this report.
The situation on Spain's La Palma island continues to remain grim as Cumbre Vieja volcano rocks the island with one after another eruption. On Thursday, the situation worsened further, so much so that the authorities were forced to close the airport on the island due to volcanic ash. Cumbre Vieja volcano continues to shoot up red-hot lava into the sky, threatening the atmosphere of the island. Scientists say that the volcano has so far expelled some 250,000 tons of highly toxic sulfur dioxide into the air since its first eruption on September 19th, with Volcanological Institute of the Canary Islands fearing that the volume of gas emissions could be higher. America's space agency NASA has released images illustrating the atmospheric effects of the eruption. Satellite images from NASA's Earth Observatory captured a ring of clouds forming around La Palma on 1st of October and a plume of ash flowing south of the island on October 4th. The plume was 3 kilometers long on Monday, said the Toulouse Volcanic Ash Advisory Center. Rivers of hot lava continue to flow, destroying anything that comes in their way. Roughly 1,000 buildings have been destroyed since the eruption began on September 19th, and 6,000 people have been evacuated from the island, which is home to 83,000 people. The impact of volcanic eruptions in Spain is now being felt in other countries too. A massive plume of Saharan dust mixed with sulfur from the volcanic eruption in the Canary Islands has shrouded swathes of Cuba, turning blue skies into a brown haze and sparking health warnings as air quality falls to unhealthy levels. Strong warm winds over the Sahara Desert typically whip up sand at this time of the year and carry it thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. However, this year it has mixed with volcanic ash particles from the outburst of Cumbre Vieja in the Canary Islands of La Palma. Volcanic eruptions are also rocking Hawaii, where the Kilauea Volcano continues to erupt. Video released by the USGS showed lava bubbling up in the crater. The volcano alert level for Hawaii's youngest and most active volcano was lowered on Monday from warning to watch. An update on the USGS website said that the lava flow is now taking place only in the volcano's crater at the summit. While the lava presents no immediate threat to populated areas, residents who live nearby continue to be warned of possible exposure to sulfur dioxide and other volcanic gases that can irritate the respiratory system. Weather has turned awry and extreme weather conditions are also battering several other parts of the world. Rescues were underway and roads were closed in several places near Birmingham, Alabama late Wednesday after heavy rains flooded parts of the state, and the weather department issued a flash flood emergency for several counties. The National Weather Service in Birmingham said that numerous people had been rescued from vehicles stuck in water and that homes and roads were flooded. The extreme weather conditions and natural calamities have raised eyebrows of the world leaders. Turkey ratified the Paris Climate Accord on Wednesday, joining the global fight against climate change weeks before the start of a critical summit in Glasgow, Scotland. On Wednesday, 353 members of Turkey's parliament ratified the agreement unanimously. A statement approved by the parliament said that Turkey was ratifying the deal as a developing country and would implement it as long as it did not harm its right to economic and social development. Nevertheless, climate change concerns all. The extreme weather conditions are an evidence as well as a warning for us to take strong and substantial actions. World Today Desk, DD India.
A dispute between Paris and Washington over Australia's decision to ditch a submarine procurement contract remains serious and unresolved, as per the French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian, adding that France's differences with Britain are growing. The transatlantic row was triggered by the United States' negotiation in secret of a military pact known as the AUKUS, or with Australia and Britain to counter China. So under this pact, Australia committed to buy US-designed submarines, and they pulled out of an existing supply deal with France. So Paris said that the deal had been done behind its back and, in protest, briefly withdrew its ambassador from Washington. He announced that France will send its ambassador back to Australia after withdrawing the envoy amid this dispute.
I have now asked our ambassadors to return to Canberra with two missions: contribute to redefine the terms of our relations with Australia in the future, and these relations should take into account the consequences of this major break of trust with this government, and firmly defend our interests in the concrete implementation of Australia's decision to end the program of future submarines with France.
The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres hit back at Ethiopia on Wednesday over the government's expulsion of 7 UN staff, demanding proof of accusations against them raised by Ethiopia's UN ambassador Tei Atsiki during a Security Council meeting. So the Ethiopian government last week had expelled 7 senior UN officials for meddling in internal affairs. Salesi, who is the concerned person, expanded on that on Wednesday, accusing the UN staff of making up data, falsely claiming hunger was used as a weapon of war, and that people had died of hunger, and of supporting the Tigrayan People Liberation Front. War broke out 11 months ago between Ethiopia's federal troops and forces loyal to the TPLF, which controls Tigray. Thousands, in fact, have died. Millions have fled their homes, and the conflict has spilled into the neighboring Amhara and Afar. Guterres said up to 7 million people in Tigray, Amhara and Afar need help, including 5 million in Tigray. which has some 400,000 people estimated to be living in famine-like conditions. He called on the government to allow the urgent delivery of aid without hindrance. The Tanzanian novelist Abdul Razak Gurnah has been awarded the 2021 Nobel Prize for Literature. Nobel Prize for Literature. Gurnah, whose novels include Paradise and Desertion, writes in English and lives in Britain. The prize is awarded by the Swedish Academy and is worth 10 million Swedish crowns, which is about $1.14 million. The prizes for achievements in science, literature and peace were created through a bequest in the will of the Swedish dynamite inventor and wealthy businessman Alfred Nobel. They have been awarded since 1901, with the final prize in the lineup, Economics, a later edition. Past winners have primarily been novelists such as Ernest Hemingway, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Anthony Morrison, poets such as Pablo Neruda, Joseph Brodsky and Rabindranath Tagore, or playwrights such as Harold Pinter and Eugene O'Neill. But writers have also won for bodies of work that include short fiction, history, essays, biography, or even journalism. Let's catch up with the news at a glance, because we're going to view snippets of world news now from across the world.
Authorities arrested an 18-year-old male in connection with a Texas high school shooting that left 4 people injured after a fight broke out in a classroom on Wednesday morning, according to police. The suspect, who fled the Timberview High School in Arlington after the shooting, was taken into custody after a brief manhunt and will be charged with 3 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. At least 2 of the 4 injured people, one of whom did not require hospitalization, suffered gunshot wounds. One of the victims remains in critical condition. In Pakistan, at least 20 people were killed and over 200 injured when an earthquake struck southern Pakistan. The earthquake, with a magnitude of 5.7, struck in the wee hours on Thursday while people were sleeping. Rescue workers said the dead were mostly women and children, while hundreds of people were rendered homeless. Over 100 mud houses collapsed and a large number were damaged, including government buildings. World Health Organization has recommended the widespread use of a malaria vaccine among children in Africa and other areas of high malaria transmission, a breakthrough in the long fight against the deadly disease. Malaria is a parasite-caused disease that's been around for thousands of years and is transmitted primarily via mosquito bites. It kills more than 4 lakh people around the world each year, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa. The vaccine is called RTSS or Muscarix, which is more than 30 years in the making and works to prime the immune system against the deadliest malaria parasite and the most common one in Africa. It is the first vaccine to complete large-scale clinical trials and show that it can significantly reduce malaria, including life-threatening malaria in young children in Africa, according to the WHO. It is also the first vaccine developed against any disease caused by a parasite. Peru's Castillo has appointed former Congress head Mirta Vázquez as Prime Minister after the country's former Prime Minister Guido Bellido resigned 2 months into his tenure on Wednesday. Castillo has appointed Bellido after his presidential victory in July, and Congress approved the new administration in August. Under Peruvian law, the Prime Minister's resignation automatically triggers that of the entire cabinet. Bellido's appointment in late July triggered a widening in bond spreads and weakened the currency. The local sol lost close to 7% through last quarter and on Wednesday ended near its record low against the US dollar. World Today Desk, DD India.
And after news at a glance, let's now look at what's making news beyond the headlines. In Japan, hundreds of migrating butterflies known as chestnut tigers or Asagi Madara in Japanese have arrived in western Japan. Chestnut tigers can be seen around this time of the year in the riverside area where bone sets are in full bloom. Officials and researchers in Indonesia are working to preserve what they believe to be the last frontier for the endangered Javan gibbon, a primate species which they say could be impacted by a changing climate and human encroachment on its habitat. Local gibbon conservation group Swara Ova tracks the population living in a 73-kilometer reserve in Petung Kriono forest, an area it says 400 gibbons call home. Swara Ova and the government hold outreach programs with the local community every month and had installed signage prohibiting hunting and illegal logging in the forest to raise awareness about the gibbon's habitat loss. There may be as many as 4,000 Javan gibbons on the island, according to Conservation International, and they are listed as endangered on the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List of Threatened Species. Mexico has a new home for some of the world's rarest flora and fauna, for which the National Autonomous University of Mexico has already inaugurated a Biodiversity Pavilion. The pavilion is backed by Mexican tycoon Carlos Slim's foundation and houses some 130,000 plant and animal species ranging from butterflies to whales. The pavilion will also aid in further research into plant and animal life with conservation and climate change themes that are central to the organization's work. A cloth sheet used to shield part of Hilags Glacier in northern Sweden over the summer saved at least 3.5 meters in height from melting, the organizers of the private initiative working towards protecting climate change says. The private initiative to demonstrate the effects of climate change in this way is the first of its kind in Scandinavia. The organizers are covering the peaks with cloths to experiment if it helps. Project co-instigator Erik Huss said the wool and corn starch-made sheet was put there to see if they could get the snow and ice to melt a little less than normal. Nestle is launching plant-based substitutes for egg and shrimp that closely mirror the taste, nutrition and performance of the originals, extending its range in the fast-growing vegan market. The egg substitute, branded Garden Gourmet Veggie in Europe, contains soy protein and omega-3 fatty acids. The vegan shrimp, called Vrimp, follows the launch of its tuna substitute last year. The two products will initially have a limited launch in some European markets, including Switzerland. A group of people walks slowly in silence past the Wall of Healing, a standalone thick wall made of coal with massive quartz crystals sticking out of it. People then pause to touch the crystals and stand close to the 40-meter-long structure, some with closed eyes. It's a symbolic extension of the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. Ukraine marks this September and October the 80th anniversary since the Nazi troops gunned down nearly 34,000 Jewish men, women and children at the wooded ravine of Babin Yar. World Today Desk, DD India. Well, Torres scored twice and Spain beat Italy in the semi-final of the National League. Here's more.
Spain ended European champion Italy's world record of unbeaten 37 matches streak as Ferran Torres scored twice in a 2-1 win at the San Siro Stadium in an entertaining Nations League semi-final on Wednesday. Italy, trailing by 2 goals at the break, had to play the entire second half with 10 men after captain Leonardo Bonucci was sent off, but showed real determination as they sought to avoid their first loss since a September 2018 defeat by Portugal. Torres put Spain ahead in the 17th minute, steering a left-wing cross from Mikel past Italy keeper Gianluigi Donnarumma into the far corner. On the ending of Italy's unbeaten 37 matches streak, Spain's coach Luis Enrique said the win goes to the hard work of the players.
It's a great win for sure, mostly because it puts us in final and now we are one of the 2 best competitors in this competition. And it's clear that this defeat for Italy was going to come, and that day was sooner rather than later, because all streaks have a beginning and an end. I think Italy's world record is incredible. We were just faithful to what we are as a team and faithful to what we always go for in matches, and the players did great today. They are tremendously happy and now we have to regroup and focus on the final.
The Azzurri, who beat Spain on penalties in Euro 2020 semi-final in July, went a man down in the 42nd minute when Bonucci was sent off for a second yellow card after elbowing Sergio Busquets. Torres sent Luis Enrique's side in with a 2-goal lead at the break when he was left unmarked to head in another fine cross from Oyarzabal.
No, I'm not necessarily putting the defeat down to anything. We lost the game. I think the red card, of course, did have a big impact on the rest of the match because up until that stage, yes, they had more ball possession as they always do. We would have had few issues, but I think we played a good football and we also had our opportunities to equalize and go into the break one apiece. That was the first half. Then of course we needed to actually be more wary not to concede that second goal at the end of the second half. That's where we should have a little more switched on. But it's already very difficult to play against Spain.
Spain had given a debut to Barcelona's 17-year-old midfielder Gavi, who became their youngest ever player after just 3 starts for his club. Spain will face the winners of Thursday's semi-final between France and Belgium in Sunday's decider. Sports Desk, DD India.
And in conclusion, let's take a look at all the events that took place around the world on this day, today in history.
On this day in the year 1940, in World War II, German troops invaded Romania to take control of strategic oil fields. In 1959, on this day, the far side of the moon was photographed for the first time by the Soviet Union's Luna 3 spacecraft. In the year 2001, on this day, US airstrikes began against 31 military targets and training camps in Afghanistan with British involvement. On the same day in the year 2004, several truck bomb attacks killed 34 people and injured 120 in the Hilton Hotel at the Egyptian border resort of Taba and in 2 other explosions at beaches near the resort. In the year 2005, on this day, the International Atomic Energy Agency and its head Egyptian-born Mohammad Ebaradei won the Nobel Peace Prize for fighting the spread of nuclear weapons. World Today Desk, DD India.
Well, the auspicious 9-day-long festival Navratri begins in India with great festivity and fervor across the country. The 9-day festival is dedicated to 9 different forms of goddess Durga. Ma Durga is worshipped in 9 forms and each day is dedicated to one of her avatars. The first night of Navratri is dedicated to Shail Putri, the daughter of the mountains. Devotees are seen visiting temples to worship with COVID-19 restrictions. And that is the world today. Thank you very much for being with us. Namaskar.